Okay, welcome to the 85th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm really delighted to be speaking to Roger Sharpley. Roger is a retired homeopath, and he originally worked in a seismology company. He went to boarding school from age 2.5 to 7.5. Thank you, Roger. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
So, I'd love for you, as I'm reading that out, you went to boarding school from age 2.5 to 7.5. I find that really shocking. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about your boarding school experience.
Okay. Well, again, as I have said before, my memory of boarding school isn't very good at all. I've, yeah, I was sent to boarding school by my parents at the age of 2.5, and I think I understand their reasons for sending me to boarding school because they weren't parented particularly well. My mother, at the age of 2.5, lost her mother, giving birth to a younger daughter. And so obviously she didn't have any real experience of parenting a child at an early age. And my father was one of 13 children, the youngest. And I don't believe that he was raised by his parents at all. He was raised by siblings. So neither of them had any real parental experience. So I think that when I got to the age of 2.5, and because they were starting up in a business, my father was a baker, and my parents had a bakery and restaurant in North London. And I think having children was just too much for them to also run a business. So it was the easiest answer to them was to send us both to boarding school. My sister, who was 5, was also sent to boarding school with me. And I seem to remember that the reason my parents gave my sister for being sent to boarding school is that somebody needed to look after me. And so I think that that was quite a task, obviously, for my sister. And I really don't believe that I had too much contact with her while I was at boarding school. But again, as I say, my memory of boarding school is almost nil. So yeah, boarding school obviously was very traumatic. Um, I had lots of problems with anxiety and still have those problems, and they seem to be coming up more strongly now I'm retired. I suppose I have more time to think about it. But yeah, it wasn't a good time in my life. When I left school at the age of 15, I actually felt that I'd got a life once I'd left school because schooling was I found it was very demanding, and I could never answer questions or in a very rational sort of way because of anxiety. I mean, I just would fall apart, when I was asked anything. I just couldn't get it together enough to understand the question first of all, and then to try and give an answer to it. So leaving school was an important time for me in my life. At the age of 22, a friend of mine and myself decided that we were going to go and live in Spain for 6 months. So we bought a dormobile and did it up into a camper van, and then moved to Spain. I suppose really as beach bums, but we worked in a beach bar in a place called Fuengirola in Spain. At the end of the season, we were there for 6 months. At the end of the season, we went back to the UK, and I decided to live in Earl's Court. And I'd met a friend of mine that I'd met in Fuengirola, and we shared a flat. And we used to go to a pub in Earl's Court where lots of people that were passing through London and travellers. Mm-hmm. And while we were there, this was a few months after we arrived in London, a couple of Australians showed up that we'd actually known in Spain. And they were working for a seismic survey company. And they told both of us that if you want a job, this American company that was based in Hounslow were actually hiring. And so we both went out to Hounslow, where the head office in this country in London was. And a couple of days later, we were in Ethiopia in a place called Massawa, which is on the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. We'd been hired as back deck helpers on a seismic survey boat. In 1970, I was working in the Southern Ocean, a few hundred miles south of the South Island in New Zealand, and we got caught in a hurricane. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of us on the boat thought we were going to survive. It was pretty horrendous, but we did. And eventually, when we got back to New Zealand, I realized I'd had this feeling before that I wasn't going to survive. And that was an experience that I had when I was at boarding school. Yeah, my health was failing, and the boarding school obviously could see what was happening, and so they told my parents that I needed to be returned home. Before I went home, I was sent to a convalescent home to try and improve my health and, I suppose, fatten me up a bit. And so anyway, I went back home and I lived a sort of more normal life. And then
with your sister, did she come back as well?
Yeah, she came back. She didn't need to go to this convalescent home that I went to. I think I was the one whose health was failing more than hers. But I think she was very scarred by her experience of boarding school. So yeah, I'm aware I'm rambling a bit. I'm afraid that
no, you know, this is very clear. So it sounds like in 1970 you were on this boat. There was a hurricane that hit, and you got this sense. All of you got this sense that I'm not going to survive, and something triggered that this was not the first time I felt this.
That's right.
And that took you back to being at boarding school. And so what did you do in 1970 when you had that realization, Roger?
Well, when we eventually got back to the UK, I asked the company that I was working for, the seismic company I was working for, if I could have some time off in the UK to see a therapist and try and sort myself out and make sense of everything that had happened in the past. And they said, okay, they were very good. They said, yeah, okay. And so I stayed in the UK for 2 years in therapy. And then I went back out into the field. And I continued working with this company for about 16 and a half years. About 13 years after I'd been working for this company, I was promoted, over the years, and I was promoted to what was called an operations manager. My job was to follow a seismic boat around various parts of the world and set things up for the boat to arrive and speak to the various oil companies that we were working for. And I was working in Yugoslavia. yeah, towards the end of the time, I was working in Yugoslavia, and I signed something that I shouldn't have done. And so when I got back to the UK at the end of this contract, the supervisor there said, "Well, you know, you signed something you shouldn't have done. We're going to demote you." And so, to cut a long story short, I said, "No, you're not. I'm going to resign," which is what I did. And I hadn't got a clue what I was going to do. I mean, working on seismic survey vessels doesn't really give you any training for anything in a more civilian sort of role. And so I decided to get a franchise. I bought a franchise with the health food shop, which was based in Leatherhead. And one of the people that came to work for me is now my wife. And after having had this franchise for 2 years, we decided that because we were selling things like homeopathic remedies and herbs and all sorts of various health things to help with one's health, we decided that we were going to study homeopathy, which is what we did. We studied homeopathy for 4 years before we became qualified homeopaths. And throughout the time that I was a homeopath, I was having therapy as well. So I suppose pretty much from the age of about 25 up, and I'm still currently, I'm in therapy. The therapist I got now, by the way, is himself an ex-boarding school survivor. And so we're on the same page, and he knows exactly the right questions to ask me. And I feel that I am progressing a lot more than I did with any of the previous therapists that I was with.
So how long? So you're 25 when you began. You don't mind me asking how old you are now. So how long have you been doing and looking at boarding school?
I'm 79 this month,
79.
in a couple of weeks' time.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's, yeah, an incredible story. So it sounds like you trained as a homeopath and you've just retired the last couple of years. So you were working as a homeopath for many, many years.
Yeah.
How was that as a journey, you know?
Oh, it was great. It was the best. As I say, getting married was the most important thing that ever happened in my life. I suppose because of my history and being at boarding school, I really never thought that I would be able to find anybody that would want to marry me. So yeah, it was really good. I mean, as a homeopath, it was the best thing I ever did, and it helped me understand, obviously, myself a bit more, although I still haven't got it sorted out as much as I'd like to. And it also helped me understand people. Homeopathy is very much about treating not just the physical state, but what's going on emotionally. It treats the whole person. And so my training as a homeopath helped me understand a more emotional state in people and myself, of course, than ever I would have been able to understand if I hadn't have got into alternative medicine.
Thank you. It really touches me what you've said there about you never felt like anyone would want to marry you. And I had a similar thought after I left boarding school. I was living in France and I met this lovely French lady. She was amazing. And I really questioned, I was like, why on earth are you with me? I couldn't understand because my belief from school was I'm a piece of shit. That was my inner belief. And I couldn't get why she would want to be with me. And it's interesting, I've spoken to quite a few other boarders, and them saying very similar things, that it was like, why on earth are you with me? And
Yeah,
it just shows for me the impact of not having your parents around, not
yeah,
having love, that attachment. So,
yeah. I was going to say, I think the need to be loved was extremely important.
mm,
Uh, you
mm,
know, it's probably what, yeah, it's probably what I consider to be the most important event that can happen for anybody.
mm,
Wife is German, by the way,
okay.
and she's been a huge support to my journey, and I love her to pieces.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise, my wife's not German, but she's not an ex-boarder, and my life has been transformed by being with her. And interestingly, Diane Poole Heller in her book, um, it's the attachment one, the power of attachment. She talks about the importance if we are insecurely attached, as I believe most of us are as ex-boarders. Most of us are either avoidant or disorganized or ambivalent, meaning we keep people away from us. We can learn to become securely attached in adulthood by having an amazing partner
Yeah,
who
no,
can love us. It sounds like you really found that, Roger.
yeah, no, I think I did.
I see. So I'd love to go back a little bit. Before we began recording, you mentioned you went to first boarding school for 6 months from 2.5 through till 3.
Yeah.
What happened? Because it sounds like, can you speak a little bit about that and what happened?
Yeah, well, it seems that they weren't feeding us particularly well. This was sort of, well, it would have been 2 or 3 years after the war, and I think that they just weren't feeding us particularly well. The first boarding school I went to was in Hayling Island, um, and so my parents took both myself and my sister out of that boarding school,
Mm,
um, and sent us to another boarding school, which was my memory. It was in. I'm just having a look at my boarding school report. It was in Hertfordshire, in a place called Fedston, Roydon, which is near Ware in Hertfordshire. And that's where we stayed until we were taken back home, until we were taken back out of boarding school. And it was because it seemed like my health was failing.
mm,
Uh,
mm.
and so that was my boarding school experience.
Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating. The more I research, I spoke to a university professor a couple of months ago, David Howe, and he's written a book called Child Abuse and Neglect. And in it, he says, what's it? Just this idea of neglect, and this comes from the NSPCC. It says neglect is the ongoing failure to meet a child's basic needs and the most common form of child abuse. And that's from their website. And as I read that, and they say a child might be left hungry or dirty or without proper clothing, supervision, shelter, or health care. And as you speak, not getting enough food, David Cameron says the same thing. These are common stories. Same for me, the first year, I used to go to matron with tummy ache
Uh,
because I've not eaten anything.
right.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do have some memories. There was a memory that I had of being actually force fed. And the way they would do that was they would hold my nose so that I had to open my mouth. And that's how I was fed of things that I didn't particularly like. Um, so yeah, I know that did happen. Um, and I think that was probably at the first boarding school that I was at that we were treated like that, or that I was treated like that.
Mhm. do you have any other memories, Roger, which have appeared? You mentioned that one and the hurricane, and it was like feeling like I wouldn't survive. Have there been other times where you've had flashbacks to, oh,
There was another one. We went to a public swimming pool with the school in a class that I was in, or the whole school, I don't know. And this was obviously when I was very young, and everybody was jumping in the pool, and I jumped in as well, but I jumped in the deep end, and I had to be dragged out. But that's a memory that I had. But yeah, I don't know why I'm smiling. It was obviously quite a serious event at the time. And it's interesting also, I always thought it was quite interesting that I spent the best part of 16 years at sea on a boat.
mm,
I'm not sure that I can swim particularly well at all. I'm not even sure I can swim. But anyway, these things happen, I suppose. Quite curious that that should have happened to me at such an early age, and then I chose to spend a number of my early years working on a boat.
Thank you. It's quite a common pattern over the years, reading biographies of explorers, you know, so Ralph Fiennes, Bear Grylls, they're, you know, they were ex-boarders and they didn't have particularly good times. And it's interesting, you know, my father was also boarder. He was in the Navy from age 18 on ships until he got sick, alcoholism, you know, cirrhosis of the liver, age 40, I think he was, possibly a bit younger. And so he was always traveling on ships. So it sounds, you know, similar. I've heard this quite a few times. So I guess what I'd love to just segue into, you mentioned when we were talking before about PTSD. When and what are some of the symptoms which are present for you? And you know, when did you start to realize I have PTSD?
Well, I don't think I ever actually realized I had it. A therapist that I was seeing, um, the previous therapist to the one that I'm seeing now, I was with her for a number of years actually, and she had come up with this that I'd actually got, you know, obviously from treating me as a therapist. She came up with the fact that I have post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, and the thing that most affects me is memory. My memory is rubbish. I just, you know, and it's becoming more and more chronic. You know, to try and remember what happened even the previous day can be quite difficult. I think I can get lost just walking outside of my back door, and it sort of gives me some understanding of why there's not much I can remember about boarding school. My memory is not good at all, and it's very debilitating. It, you know, it prevents me from doing lots of things, and I feel quite embarrassed at trying to remember people's names or faces, and but yeah, no, it's really difficult, and I really have to struggle with um, on a daily level with trying to remember what I did the previous day or what I need to remember to do tomorrow, or you know, it can be quite difficult. And I put this all down to my boarding school experience.
Thank you, Roger. When did you first link it to the symptoms you'd had since you were very young to boarding school?
I suppose when I was studying homeopathy, a lot of these things became quite clear that you know, that boarding school was a really difficult period for me, and I mean, I always used to, yeah, I always used to carry the label of being stupid.
Mm, mm,
I
mm,
couldn't remember things particularly well. And that hurt a lot, you know, and I don't think I am stupid. Um, I just have a problem with my memory, and it can come over that I'm not as clever as maybe I could be or should be.
mm, mm, mm. So during homeopathy, when you were studying, that started to bring to the surface. Oh, actually, my boarding school time was a very difficult time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do also. I know that I tend to speak about my boarding school experience perhaps a bit more than I should, and it could come over as me sounding a bit like a poor me. Um, because I think with some of my friends they say, "Oh, he's not talking about boarding school again," is it? You know, but it was such um, a difficult period in my life that you know I'm always trying to come to terms with it, and I find it very difficult to do that. But you know, and certainly from my experience, therapy is the only way of actually dealing with something like that. You know, it's not possible to. I don't think it's possible to try and sort these things out by oneself.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. What has it been within the therapy, Roger, that's really helped, which has started to bring that healing?
Um, well, it's obviously being able to express and talk about, um, you know, past difficult situations and issues. But I think also with the therapist that I'm seeing now, I feel much more understood because he's had a similar experience to me, and
Mm,
so he knows to ask the right questions, and it does. I do feel like I'm starting to get more understanding of myself, I suppose.
mm,
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's realistic or not, but I do hope that I can sort this post-traumatic stress disorder out and perhaps regain a memory, and that would help me enormously to live a more normal life. I'm very aware that my wife tells me I'm not a particularly happy person these days, and I know I always used to be. I mean, I did
mm,
when I was much younger, but and I've had problems with depression, and I mean that's still there, I suspect, but hopefully I can move out of that and come to terms with my past and get a life.
mm, mm. Thank you, thank you. So I'm hearing a struggle with memory, and you know, doing the therapy, you feel much more understood.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, it's being able to speak about these difficult experiences and actually share. And it's interesting what you shared about friends and them not really understanding or going, oh, he's talking about boarding school. And I've often found that with myself, but also in the men's circles I do, or the one-to-one work, is for some, it might be the first time we feel understood when someone else has been through a similar experience who's actually looked at it. Because sometimes we can speak to an ex-boarder who loved it. You know, been having this conversation quite a bit recently that people say to me, you know, because I have videos on YouTube, I get comments from time to time from people who are quite angry with me talking about boarding school. And they're like, I loved it. I'm like, okay, yeah, no worries. And I get people who say that to me. And then I say, well, do you have any of these symptoms, you know, that Nick Duffel talks about? Um, struggle with intimacy, struggle with workaholism, and they go yes to all of them. Struggle with addictions, they struggle with sleeping. I say I loved it, and yet I have all of these symptoms.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't
It
it?
is, it is, it is. The other
Yes.
thing resonated with Roger was when you said um, that labor of being stupid, of thinking you were stupid. And again, that was something that I had at boarding school. I think it was age 14. I worked out that I was very depressed and I stopped talking.
Oh,
I
really?
used to talk. That was my way. It was like when I spoke, people would often criticize me or insult me or question what I said, and I'd get very angry. And understanding neuroscience now, when the brain goes into fear or anger, there's very little activity. That freeze. And so I'd go into freeze a lot and I
Mm,
couldn't think. So I just went, right, I won't speak.
yeah. No, I'm familiar with the freeze thing, certainly.
Mm.
Uh,
How does it manifest for you, Roger, the freeze?
well, I just, if I'm asked questions, then I put myself under pressure, which I suspect was the pressure I was put under when I was at boarding school. And I just can't come up with an answer. I mean, I don't know. I just blank out. I just lose it.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So no, I do understand what you've been saying, and there's something else that actually just come to my mind that probably could be useful to say about my history. In 2001, I had a heart problem. I had to have a valve replacement, a mitral valve replacement. And I think that was probably when I first started feeling or having symptoms of depression. And meditation became quite important for me. And I used to go to a meditation group in Ham, which is close to where I live. And it was the style of meditation was that of Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, yeah. I've been to
And
see Thich Nhat Hanh about
yeah,
20 years ago.
yeah, right. And I actually ended up going to Plum Village for a couple of weeks
Oh,
on his course, which I found very helpful and quite useful. And meditation is very important. And um, I think that because the boarding schools I went to were Catholic run,
mm,
I'm not very much in favor of religion. And so Buddhism is something that's quite important to me. It just makes a lot of sense. Um,
mm,
yeah, conventional religion, I just can't make any sense of at all. It doesn't just seem to add up. Um, and so yeah, I do read a lot of. I'm really interested in spirituality.
mm,
Uh, I think religion has passed me by a bit. I can't make any sense of it at all.
mm. Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, the Buddhist approach on life has helped a lot.
Yeah, Buddhism saved my life. You
Yeah,
probably heard of my story. Um,
yeah, I do vaguely remember. I mean, I did hear of it, but my memory doesn't allow me to. So,
well, yeah, I'd been homeless 2000, 2001. I went to Africa. I basically went as a volunteer coordinator for a charity. Uh, and I got into drink, drugs, quite a mess. Started to think I was going insane. And then 2002, I'd been meditating, but on and off, and often I'd been drinking and I try and meditate. So not the best uh, place to meditate. And then 2002, I ended up in a Buddhist monastery. I went to a retreat center for 3 weeks. And while I was there, I realized I was a mess. And
yeah,
it was at that time I came across two books by ex-boarders from my school, very well known, and they'd questioned their times at my school. And suddenly that just woke something up. And I was on this retreat doing this meditation, and it was like I started to realize how much anger I had. I thought I'd loved the school, it was good for me, but I
yeah,
just squashed all of this trauma down. And I realized I was a total mess. I'd been offered a job for a working for the same company. I'd been in Ghana in West Africa, been offered a job for the Thailand country manager job, and I was like, I'm a total mess. I can't take a job, you know. And so I stayed in the monastery, and I stayed there I went for 10 days. I stayed for over 1,000 days, so 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And then I came across Nick Duffell's work, and we obviously meditated. But I did struggle to meditate, and the abbot used to say, "Don't do too much,"
Mm.
because what was happening, I was meditating, and all of the trauma was surfacing, and I just couldn't handle it. And
Yeah.
so I started working with a psychotherapist or a Jungian analyst, and started to work through it. But I could resonate with your story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I've sort of been involved in meditation for what, 20 odd years, and I'm
Mm.
still not sure I know how to meditate, I have to say.
Yeah, well, I think meditation is like, it's simple and the most complex thing in the whole world.
Yeah.
So I think I'm the same sometimes. I'm like, do I really know? Um, meditation. But yeah, I think I I find it such a healing paradigm. So I love that you found, therapy, meditation. Is there anything else which has been helpful for you, Roger?
Um, mm. Oh, finding somebody that loves me.
Mm, 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 mm.
Um, well, I mean, sort of just talking about on this subject of love. Um, you asked me if there's anything else that helped me. We had a cat,
Mm, mm,
22 years old, which is a long life for a cat, and unfortunate, and that really did support. I mean, it was part of my little family group. I didn't have. Um, I actually, it was an informed choice. I decided not to have children because I was really afraid that I would repeat the same things that happened to me.
mm,
And I don't know how, but I knew this at a fairly early age. But anyway, we had a cat, and it lived for 22 years. Unfortunately, it it died on the 22nd of December, and so we buried it in our back garden. But that was really lovely having an animal that we were so close to and that was so close to us. It was really something special.
mm,
I'm
mm,
really surprised how emotionally I can still get at thinking about the cat. Coming down in the morning and not seeing it there, and going to bed at night not seeing it there is hard, very hard.
mm. Thank you. I was visiting a friend a couple of days ago, and we go and cat sit for him from time to time. And she saw us, me and my wife, and she's like, she got up and started brushing. It's like,
Yeah,
we had a couple of cats who were, one was 20, one was about 16, 17, and I
right.
found such a lot of love
Yeah,
from the cats and to the cats, and I can really resonate, and I can resonate as well with the children. Is I decided probably in my 20s that I wouldn't have children. I,
yeah,
I, I was a monastic, so I was celibate, so it was not on my radar. But I had that thought that if I did, I'd be like my father. And my family always used to say, "Oh, no, you wouldn't."
yeah,
And now I understand the unconscious. It's like, well, actually, those patterns, obviously, it's different now. I've done so many years' work, but at that time, I'm sure I would have just become my father, that
yeah,
angry, aggressive man.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, the I certainly, one thing that did help me, by the way, as we're talking, I'm sort of remembering that. Um, I grew up with pets.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
we had cats and dogs, and that really helped me a lot. It was a really good experience to be to have a pet to love and to feel loved. And the great thing about pets is that they what they require is unconditional. It's not the same as with people. They don't demand anything from you. They just naturally give out what they do in the way of love and affection, and I found it very easy to give that back to them as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was reading some research from my video yesterday about touch and the importance of touch, and I'm starting to link that in that we didn't get touch at school, most of us, not appropriate touch. And as Joy Shavrin says, this is a serious deprivation for long, significant part of childhood not being touched. But interestingly, animals, they groom each other, primates certainly, 10 to 20% of the day. And it's that touch. And we need that to develop, decrease our heart rate, increase our what is it? I can't remember the other aspects of it, but it soothes us.
Definitely.
And we say nowadays with boarding schools, oh, you can WhatsApp someone, but there's no touch, there's no parents there. Even if it's to tussle and, wrestle with your dad or your mom, it's like there's that loving touch. And so, yeah, that's just something. And animals, they also need touch. So, is there anything else that you would love to share, Roger?
I can't think of anything. I suppose. Yeah, I suppose what's kept me reasonably healthy, and I do consider myself reasonably healthy, is when I was studying homeopathy, which would have been back in the late 80s. One of the homeopaths that I considered to be probably one of the best homeopaths had recommended a way of keeping oneself fit physically. And he suggested something called Tai Chi and Qigong. So in the late 1980s, I found a master in Soho, a Chinese guy, who did Tai Chi and Qigong. His name was Sifu Lam, Lam. And so I learned to form a Tai Chi form that I've done every day since. I mean, there's been days where I've missed it, but I do it every morning. And I do feel it keeps me quite fit physically, and the slowness of it is important. I do tend to do lots of things in a fairly speedy way, and
me too.
This Tai Chi and Qigong does help to slow me down. I'd like to slow myself down even more, but I think that providing I live long enough, that will come with time.
Tai Chi and Qigong, that's fascinating. I love how our experience have been very similar. So it was about 2000. My mother is a Chinese brush painter.
Oh, right.
She's friends with a Qigong master, and so I learnt it, did some courses, and then while I was in the monastery, I did Tai Chi, Qigong, but also Falun Gong every day. And I found that so healing. Again, that slowing down, just doing those movements. And when I've been teaching meditation in the last 20 years, especially corporately, often people will struggle to sit and calm their minds. But if they do some Qigong beforehand, they can then settle into meditation much more easily. And I've got into a habit now of doing just a little bit of Qigong every day. I'll go in the garden barefoot every morning as the sun's rising, and I go and do a bit of Qigong. So that's beautiful. I love that you still do it every day.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's important to me. It keeps me fit and reasonably healthy. Although having said that, I do have a problem with diplopia, double vision.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
it's happened in the last year. Up until a year ago, I was playing tennis at um, a fairly reasonable standard.
mm,
But I started having problems with this diplopia and not I can't think of the word right now.
mm,
Yeah, with balance.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
realized that if I continued to try playing tennis the way that that I was really going to injure myself badly. So I had to give up tennis, which I found quite disappointing because it was one of the highlights in my week. But I've joined a choir, and that
Yeah.
gives a lot
Mm,
of support. I really love it. It's you know I it's interesting because when I was really young, I went with a friend. This is when I was about 10 or 12 years old. I went with a friend to a choir practice, and everybody was they would sing at weddings, and everybody was queuing up to get paid. They used to get a little form of payment, and I queued up with in the same queue. And when I got to the choir master, the choir master said to me, "I'm not paying you. You can't sing." And so that really bugged me actually, and so now I've started singing again, and I don't think I've got a particularly bad voice at all. Actually, I mean I'm not great, but you know I can sing, and I really enjoy it, and I get a lot from it. It's a
mm.
very healthy pastime.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Wow. So I'm hearing so many great things. You've got Tai Chi, Qigong, singing, therapy, you're someone who loves you. It's like it's
Yeah,
really inspiring.
yeah.
And
But
yeah.
what I feel that I don't have is a purpose, and
Mm,
that's really important to have a purpose in life.
mm,
And I suppose the only purpose I have is trying to come to terms with my past and my boarding school experience. But it doesn't really hold me enough. I don't feel. You know, I would really like to find something that I could get really into and enjoy. But you know, and just trying to understand my boarding school experience isn't sufficient. Really, it's there's a lot of negativity around. You know, that experience.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, 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 purpose. Yeah, I do feel it's very important for us, for men, and especially, for women and men, that idea of purpose. So yeah, I can resonate with that. Well, I've really enjoyed today's conversation, Roger. It's been a real blessing speaking to you.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's been really enlightening. I can really feel you. I've felt very touched and in tears at points. So, bless you for your courage in coming and sharing. And it's for me, inspiring. Hopefully, others who are listening can
Mm,
be equally inspired by your courage.
thanks. Thanks for that.
So, is there anywhere people can get in touch with you, or and what would you recommend as next resources for people who are maybe listening to this? um
Um, well, I'd certainly recommend anybody that's been to boarding school needs to find themselves a therapist to try and come to terms with, you know, the trauma that obviously that they probably would have experienced. That's certainly my experience anyway. Um, Getting in touch with me, well, I've got an email. I don't know whether, I mean, does one put emails out? I don't know.
Sometimes if you do that, sometimes you get spammed.
Oh,
So I'm sure people can find you on
yeah,
social media or things like that, if they want to. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real
you for
pleasure.
talking to me and bringing me onto your podcast. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. A pleasure. Okay. Take care, Roger. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.